Welcome to Can You Believe It? Today, I want us to ask a question that we all ask at one time or another. I want us to look at the question, where is God when it hurts? Where is God when it hurts? You see, the problem of pain and suffering is so complex, and for some of us, it can serve as a major speed bump in our understanding of where and how God exactly fits in our lives. For others, pain and suffering can awaken us to our need for a redeemer, the one who saves us from our miseries. Some of us here have walked through complex and very difficult situations in life that left us wondering, where could God have been now? Why would God allow me to experience the kind of hurt and discouragement that I experienced? Maybe even some of us, why me? See, there's absolutely no doubt that some of these challenges and the pain some of us experience are a result of the poor choices we make. Some of the pain and suffering we experience are due to natural catastrophes like hurricanes and tsunamis and tornadoes and earthquakes. There is nothing we can do to avoid such kind of pain or such kind of tragedies, but the results are often extremely painful. The reality for us believers is that we will walk through many kinds of hardships and we will experience pain at one time or another before we exit this planet. But Jesus gave us a heads up. In John chapter 16, verses 33, Jesus says, I quote, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. End of quote. That's John 16, verses 33. The issue of pain and suffering affects both those within the church and those outside of the church. Both believers and unbelievers alike experience the problem of pain and suffering. In fact, I do not know of a bigger struggle when it comes to the concept of God that is common to those within the church and outside the church than what C.S. Lewis labeled the problem of pain. Research indeed shows that the number one reason that non-believers or people reject God, or the number one reason non-believers give for not following Jesus, is their belief that suffering disapproves the existence of God. They argue, well, if God exists, there should not be so much suffering in this world. Many use that as a reason for not believing in God. But the problem of pain and suffering, therefore, is a problem for everyone, the Christian and the skeptic alike. None of us can escape it. But the reality is, most of us do stumble over it. There are many reasons for pain and suffering, as we've stated, and some of our pain and suffering may come from family conflicts and poor decision-making processes. Some of our pain comes from the financial pressures we experience and from life-altering diagnoses and illnesses and diseases we never expected. Some of these hurts and the pain we experience often stem from abandonment, from a marital strife for those who are married, abuse, sorrow and sadness due to loss, personal failures and setbacks and personal confrontations. There are many reasons for the problem of pain and suffering that we experience. However, to those who are acquainted with pain and God know very well that sometimes God's hand of comfort and his compassion towards us is so powerful, and often we cannot even describe it. God's grace, while in the midst of the pain, becomes sufficient. Often God appears on the scene of our calamity with astonishing and amazing forms of assistance and provision that we cannot understand. At that moment, all we can do is stand in awe of his presence as our character and testimony are developed. At other times, however, God seems to be so distant, so quiet, and even maybe disinterested in our most hurtful and painful situations. Have you been there? At that moment when we are in the deep of the struggle, the deep of the valley, we feel like God moved and left us no forwarding address. We can't pinpoint anything positive from a human perspective at that particular moment. The situation feels bleak and dark. It's almost like you could smell God's absence. The kind of suffering that can almost be felt deep within the fibers and the muscles of the body. Have you been there? When you suffered and felt all alone. Listen to this following testimony of somebody who was going through pain. I want to quote it, and this is what he says. It all started slowly but sure. I felt pain and isolation. Though my friends could have helped, they could not share my sorrow. It was too deep a well. When my loss was fresh, people were all around. They called, offered to help, sent cards, and brought meals. They cared, and their care helped ease the razor-sharp pain in my heart, but for a while. But then they stopped. There were no more meals coming. The phone calls strangely faded. The phone was silent. And the mailbox was empty again. No more cards to wish you well. Along with the loss, depression had set in, and it was like it had come to stay. It was hard to talk about the pain, and I never wanted the pity, the mournful look, the squeeze on the arm, and the asked question, so how are you? I didn't know how to answer that question. I didn't know how I was. Part of me was crushed. I would never be the same again. My life was radically altered. End of quote. I know right now there's a lot of pain going around, especially with the changes that people are asking for. And some have lost family members in the process, and the pain is so real. Have you ever felt like God had abandoned you and that you were all alone in a dry canyon? Yes, we know that God has all the power and the provision necessary to alleviate our misery, but when we are going through it, it doesn't feel like God is lifting a finger to come to our rescue. Where is God during those moments? Job chapter 30, verses 16 through 17 says, and now my heart is broken. Depression haunts my days. My weary nights are filled with pain, as though something were relentlessly gnawing at my bones. And then you go farther to Job chapter 30, verses 25 through 28. It reads, so I looked for good, but evil came instead. I waited for the light, but darkness fell. My heart is troubled and restless. Days of affliction have come upon me. I walk in gloom without sunlight. The psalmist in Psalm number 13 writes, "Oh Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will the enemy have the upper hand on me?" I want to submit to us this great moment, that it is during those times that you feel like the world's weight is on your shoulders, when your faith, or when our faith is tested. It is during these moments when God provides for us an opportunity to grow deeper in our relationship with Him, when our cries for help seems to go unanswered and our thirst for answers seem to go unquenched. Philip Yancey wrote a best-selling book, I think in the 1970s, titled "Where is God When It Hurts?" Later in 1990, Yancey revised the book and added about 100 pages of his perspective on the problem of pain and suffering. But then came September 11th of 2001. We all know what happened. Yancey was bombarded by lots of phone calls from the United States, England, Holland, and Australia, and other parts of the world. People wanted to know if he had anything to say about the 9/11 tragedy. Yancey admits that he declined to make any comments because anything he could think of sounded like a cliche. Soon afterwards, Yancey teamed up with Zodovan and published the book, "Where is God?" with all the proceedings going to American Red Cross. And to this very day, I can attest that we are still asking the question, where is God when it hurts? Where is God when disaster strikes? Where is God when the loved ones die? Let me share with you a real story of a gentleman by the name of Horatio Spafford. Horatio Spafford was a successful lawyer and a real estate investor living here in Chicago in the 1800s. Spafford and his wife, Anne, were close supporters to D.L. Moody of Moody Bible Institute, located right here in Chicago. The Spaffords were blessed with 4 daughters and a son by the name of Horatio Jr. The first tragedy to befall the Spaffords was the death of their son at the age of 4 of scarlet fever. A year later, in 1871, tragedy struck again when the Chicago fire killed hundreds and left more than 90,000 people homeless. Spafford had invested heavily in Chicago properties, and all of his investments went up in smoke during the Great Fire of Chicago. Spafford lost all of his real estate investments in a matter of a day. See, the loss and the pain was too much to bear, and so the Spaffords decided to take a break from all that had happened in Chicago. Take a break from the realities of life. In response, the Spaffords planned a vacation to Europe. But just before the Spaffords could leave Chicago for New York to sail to Europe, Spafford was held back by business dealings in the city of Chicago. And so he decided to send Anna and his 4 girls to proceed to Europe, promising to join them as soon as possible. Sadly, the French ship that Spafford's family was traveling on, Ville de Havre, was struck by another ship near the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and sunk in only 12 minutes. Spafford's 4 daughters died in that accident, and Spafford's wife was found alive, hanging to a broken piece of wood that was floating in the middle of the cold ocean. 226 out of 307 people or passengers died that day. Anna Spafford is quoted to have said, "God gave me 4 daughters. Now they have been taken from me. Someday I will understand Why? See, when Anne reached Cardiff in Wales in the UK, she wired her husband the following message, which was dated on December 1st of 1873. Quote, "Saved alone, what shall I do?" End of quote. Talk about tragedy. One after another. First, the death of the son, then all the properties and assets destroyed, and 4 of Spafford's daughters died almost at the same time. See, upon receiving the wire, Horatio boarded another vessel to join Anna, his grieving wife, and to bring her back home to Chicago. While on the voyage, the voyage was on en route to Europe, the ship's captain summoned Horatio to inform him of the exact coordinates where his daughters had drowned. Heartsick and heartbroken, grieving, Spafford turned to his cabin to grieve alone, and with a pen in hand, poured out his heart to God the following words. From the cabin of Horatio Spafford came the words of this beautiful song. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like seas billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. In the midst of the tragedy, we have a song that has blessed generations of believers. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. In ways that only the Lord can do, the Holy Spirit began to minister peace and strength to Spafford's troubled soul at that time. This is at the moment when he was at his lowest point in life. See, in reading these lyrics, you can hear his faith taking wings and he begins to fly, and the reality of the Lord's presence in the midst of his pain. These lyrics reveal a heart that understands that God is in the midst of the dilemma and the tragedy of Horatio Spafford. And so he is in the midst of the dilemma and the tragedy you may be going through right now. God does not leave you when you are going through the hardship. Writings to his white sister while on the ship, Spafford wrote this. On Thursday, we passed over the spot where she went down, meaning the vessel, in the mid-ocean. The waters 3 miles deep, but I do not think of our dear ones there. They are safe. End of quote. The Spafford had 3 other children after this loss. 2 of them, Bertha and Grace. 1 did not make it. But in 1881, the Spaffords moved to Jerusalem and established what became known as the American Colony, a mission that was forced to help the poor. Horatio Spafford later died of malaria in Jerusalem on October 16th of 1888, 1 year just before my grandfather was born. Just 4 days short of his 60th birthday. But before he died, Horatio wrote, and I quote, I rely exclusively on the power and grace of God in Christ. I am a miracle of grace. Blessed God, how patient thou hast been with me. End of quote. Can you imagine? Horatio has the guts to write this even after suffering tragedy after tragedy. The question of pain, tragedy, and God's involvement during moments of pain and suffering is as old as humanity. You are not alone. The book of Job records for us the life of God's servants dealing with tragedy and asking the same questions we ask today. Elie Wiesel, who is a Nobel Prize winner and author and an Holocaust survivor, tells the story of two men and a young man who were hung at a Nazi concentration camp. All of the prisoners, including Wiesel, were paraded at the gallows to witness the horror. Wiesel writes that the older men died quickly, but the death of the younger men lasted much more longer. Listen to what Wiesel writes while documenting the last cries of these men in the death camps. "Where is God?" one voice asked. As the torment continued, the voice called again, "Where is God?" Wiesel writes, he heard a voice within an answer. "Where is he? He is there. He's hanging on the gallows. God is in the midst of the pain and the suffering. He is right there with you." Philip Yancey's book had one man say to him, "Sorry, I didn't have the time to read your book, but where is God when it hurts?" C.S. Lewis, in The Problem of Pain, writes, I quote, "We can ignore pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." End of quote. I believe that when the statement, "Where is God when it hurts?" is voiced, often it's a signal of man's need for supernatural intervention. It is a cry for the state of helplessness and a need for rescue from the quagmire. My question in the midst of these many questions is this: where is God when people are hurting? Or rather, even better, I can ask the question, where is the church when God's people are hurting? Where are we as a church when others are hurting? If we, the church, are doing our job, that is binding wounds and comforting those that are grieving, helping those that are financially stressed, and offering food to the hungry, I don't think people will wonder so much about the whereabouts of God when it hurts. It's important to remember that no one escapes hurt, and no one is exempt from hurt and suffering. See, the book of Job and the life of Job depicts real life challenges. It's a book that has sustained God's people in some of the darkest days of life. The Victorian essayist by the name of Thomas Carlyle called it the grandest book ever written with a pen. Job knows what people say and think, not just what they say publicly or in church. Job knows what people say behind closed doors and in whispers. He knows what we say in our tears. I heard a story about a man who had gone through quite an ordeal. When asked to tell the story about what had been going on through his life, he said, "Well, there are three versions. Which one do you want to hear?" First, there's the version I tell the Christians. Then there's the version of the story I tell to non-Christians. And finally, there's the truth. Job didn't just give us the Christian version of what we wanted to hear. He gives us the truth as it is in all its raw power. He told us the truth like it is. Job grappled with God and with two basic questions. Will the good ever be rewarded? And will the evil ever be punished? Will the corruption that we see around ever be judged fairly, ever be punished? Or will the wicked continue to get away? On a deeper level, Job grappled with the question, could he believe with confidence that the God who created the universe and rules sovereignly over the known and the unknown galaxies is a good God? Could this God be trusted in the midst of pain and suffering? And is he worthy of devotion and reverence? Will Job worship God no matter what comes his way, or will he cave into the pressures of his friends and the pressures of his doubtful and hopeless wife? You know, we can all list the different kind of hurts we have faced in our lives over the years, one after another. But the question we all are left with is this: why is it that sometimes God leaves us in the dark with no answers? Where is God at those moments? Our passage tells us of a man who felt pain and loss. All he had was gone. But we see him asking the same questions we ask today. Where is God when it hurts? In the book of Job, the first chapter, verses 1 through, tells about Job's character. He was blameless. He was upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. So he had nothing to do with how he lived because he was a good man. In verse 3, calls Job the greatest in all of the East. He was a rich man from the land of Uz, or the Transjordan region. He had it all. But in verse 13 through 20, things kind of got downhill fast. Verse 15 says that his oxen were plowing the fields and the donkeys were in the fields when all of a sudden the Sabaean and Arabic nomads swooped down and stole 500 yoke of oxen and killed his servants. In verse 16, Job's 7,000 sheep and servants were in the field when fire and lightning came down and burned up all the people watching over them and the sheep. And then verse 17 states that the Chaldeans and the Mesopotamian warriors came in 3 columns as in war and took his 3,000 camels and killed his servants. In verse 18 and through 19, Job, before he could blink, his 7 sons and 3 daughters were having a party together when a great tornado came and the house they were in fell on the children and killed them all. Tragedy after tragedy. There's nothing Job had done to deserve this. But where was God when all this is happening? Kindly, when you look at that first chapter of Job, note these descriptions. In each instance, it says only one escaped. The devastation was so total. And as one was telling the news of sorrow, another came in with even worse news. It could not get any worse than this. In each situation, Job was bitten with a thorn bush and then dumped on top of a cactus bush. The physical pain, the emotional and psychological pain were severe. This is the amazing thing in this story of Job. Consider his response, which is recorded for us in verse 20. John tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and worshipped. What? He worshipped? Yes, he did. Even as things were going to go farther downhill, Job managed to worship. Job was filled with sorrow and dismay, and later in the book we read that he developed boils and sores all over his body. But Job stayed faithful to his God even during these tough times. The story of Job gets more spicier when you think it's coming to an end. In the midst of Job's suffering comes his friends Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, and they all tell him that, Job, you must have done something crazy. You must have sinned. Confess. Tell us what you've done to deserve all this trouble that you're facing right now. Let us remember that Job was a righteous man. We do not know what he suffered and why he suffered, but the enemy was behind it all. We also know this: God allowed it for his glory. Let's be honest. Some of our questions regarding suffering will never be answered on this side of heaven. We will not be able to understand why. I want to submit to us this particular moment that there is even a more important question that emerges out of this life of Job. And I think the question we should be asking ourselves this moment is this. Not where is God when we suffer, but maybe the question we need to be asking ourselves is this. Where are we spiritually when we suffer? James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, the half-brother of Jesus, reminds us by saying this: consider it pure joy. Another translation reads, consider it all joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance or steadfastness. Do we keep the faith during the hardest of times? Suffering is inevitable for the believer and for us. We must therefore become or welcome the night, for it's only during the night when the stars can shine. Those moments of darkness develop the best of us. Tim Keller writes in his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, that while other worldviews lead us to sit in the midst of life's joys, foreseeing the coming sorrows, Christianity empowers its people to sit in the midst of this world's sorrows, testing the coming joy. And then, of course, Mother Teresa said, let him use you without having to consult you first. That's deep. Let him use you without having to consult you first. See, Job is not done, for while you think it's over, his wife comes on the scene, and this is what she tells him. Will you curse God and die, or will you remain faithful? Job's response is, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return to you. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Could we be able to say, like Job, when we are facing suffering and pain? Verse 22 records that in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with any wrongdoing. Some of us result in cursing God and turning away from God. I have a friend whose father fell from a ladder and died on December 24th. Putting up Christmas lights, his response was, I want nothing to do with God. And I have more stories of that nature. But these kinds of stories are many, and they are spread out all over the spectrum. But how many can say, like my friend who was watching his wife in her 30s die of cancer? This is what he said: I have learned to see beyond the physical reality with spiritual reality. End of quote. Jesus told us that pain and suffering would be part of our lives. I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. John chapter 16, verses 33. Speaking of suffering, Apostle Paul, a man who underwent beatings and shipwrecks and multiple imprisonments, recognizes something that is absolutely essential for us to remember as believers. Our pain is not meaningless, but has a purpose. Is the truth of the matter. Our pain and suffering will not last forever. Jesus willingly suffered the greatest pain because he knew the end of the story, and so do we. Scripture shows this in Revelation chapter 21, verses 3 and 4. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away their tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. Where is God when it hurts? God is in you, the one hurting, not in the heart. Where is God when it hurts? God is in you, the one hurting, not in the heart. As you walk through suffering today, tomorrow, and in the days to come, remember the words of our Savior, Jesus Christ, on John chapter 14, verses 27. I am leaving you with a gift, the peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give you is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. And then be sure of this. I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. God is with us in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our sufferings. Trust in him to lift you up from where you are at. Thank you.